It's The Lit Show with Jeremy Fee. New episode each Tuesday. Authors welcome, comments encouraged. Hello everyone, welcome to The Lit Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Fee. As always, I've got something special for you today. It's my reading wrap-up book battle for September 2022. What a wonderful month it has been. You know, I like to do these book battles every month so I can determine my best read of the month, and then at the end of the year, pit them up against each other to determine my best read of the year, and perhaps someday have a best read of the decade, putting every winner from every year for an entire decade into one giant battle. So very exciting. September, we had a lot of readathons going on, a lot of reading special events. It was the second and final month of Book Trek 2022. This time, the idea was to read something other than one of the main TV series for Star Trek. It's also Sci-Fi September. I've enjoyed just the idea of reading science fiction in general. By the way, my cats Jack and Daxter say hello as they make some background noise there. It's also Shake-Timber, in which some people are trying to read some Shakespeare in September. I did a reread. It's Shorty September, in which people are reading short works of literature. Thus, you'll see some short stories and poetry in here. And Regina, over there at Regina's Haunted Library, also decided to make it Vamp-Timber, in which you're reading vampire books. I try to participate in all of these readathons at least a little bit. I should go ahead and show you, here is everything I read for the month, so you can see it, think about it, and try to decide what you are rooting for in this battle. Some of them obviously are short stories and novellas, a little bit of poetry in there. I read so much. Here we go. Our first pairing, we've got representing Book Trek 2022. I read a graphic novel. It's a compilation for Starfleet Academy. This took place in the Kelvin universe timeline and had some crossover events with that Kelvin Enterprise crew, as well as these alien Starfleet Academy characters. It was a fun read. It is being pitted up against a BookTubers awesome novel, philosophical novel. It is The Peril and Decline by Pae Veo. Pae Veo is one of the most creative people on BookTube. I had previously read Pae's short story collection, and I was really happy to read The Peril and Decline. When you compare these two books, it is very easy to say that The Peril and Decline is an easy winner. It delivers a philosophical story about a young woman who's lost her memory and thus has a bit of an existential crisis as she finds her home is full of rocks, and she's trying to figure out her purpose in life. Very neat read. The next pairing, we've got a book I read from NetGalley, so thank you to the publishers and NetGalley for providing a free advanced reading copy ebook for me. It's called Station Eternity. It is science fiction. So this is representing Sci-Fi September. It's by Mur Lafferty. It's not just science fiction though. It's got a murder mystery in it. The main character in Station Eternity is a woman who has this problem of people being murdered in her life, and she tries to figure out the answer. Law enforcement doesn't like this. They find her very suspicious, which you would have thought would have happened to one of those Agatha Christie characters like Miss Marple. It was a fun read. It's being put up against a book I read as a buddy read with Liam, aka Himvar, over there at the channel Liam's Lyceum, The Wheel of the Infinite by Martha Wells. You probably know the name Martha Wells from the Murderbot series, but believe it or not, Martha Wells has written a bunch of fantasy as well, and this is one of those older fantasy novels. I thought it was okay, but being pitted up against Station Eternity, I'm going to give the win to that sci-fi mystery because it was much more interesting read for me, trying to figure out the clues. Nothing against Will of the Infinite, though. Martha Wells is a good writer. And that brings me to a new release that I read by Stephen King. It's Fairy Tale. Very exciting story. First half, very realistic, and then it becomes a portal fantasy. I highly recommend it. I had a video last week that I put out asking the question, should you read Fairy Tale, with the answer being yes. It is up against, representing Sci-Fi September, The Expanse short story called Drive by James S.A. Corey, who I have heard is not a real person. This gave me just a little taste of The Expanse. It is a prequel for the series, and it's not very long at all. Looking at the two of these, the obvious win win is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. It's such an exciting story and a delight to read. The next pairing, representing Shake Timber, my Othello reread as a buddy read with Margaret Pinard. Margaret Pinard is one of my favorite AuthorTubers. I've read all 5 of her books. She's working on a short story collection right now, which is really exciting. So I was glad she took the time to do a buddy read. We were able to email back and forth a little bit about Othello. Othello is one of my favorite Shakespearean plays because I've taught it over and over through the years, but it is up against a new release that is a poetry book by Saeed Jones called Alive at the End of the World. You can get these poems for free if, like me, you have an Amazon Prime membership with Audible, where you have access to the Audible's, whatever they call it, Plus catalog, where you're able to get free audiobooks on there. Saeed Jones is someone that I know. He went to the same high school as me. We both did speech and debate, so I knew him through those activities. He's an amazing poet, and I'm going to give his book the win here. Up next, we've got a pairing for Vamp Timber. When I realized that Regina St. Clair was making Vamp Timber a thing, I decided that I should read George R.R. Martin's vampire novel, Fever Dream. I like George R.R. Martin's work, but I did not know what I was getting into. I did not realize that this was historical fiction with vampires, and that it would be delving so much into the slavery issue and all of that. I am putting it up against Regina St. Clair, R. St. Clair's new release, Code Red. Such an exciting vampire story. On the cover of the book, it says the vampires are running the asylum. It is about a situation in which a young man's parents think that he has this psychological condition where he thinks he's a vampire, so they put him in an asylum. But oops, he really is a vampire. It's a great concept for a novel, and R. St. Clair really captures the small town feel with the characters. Great dialogue. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend Code Red. Obviously, Code Red is going to win here and advance over George R. R. Martin's work, which I thought was just a little bit uncomfortable to read, quite frankly. The next pairing, we've got The Dispatcher Book 3, Travel by Bullet, which is by John Scalzi. I have listened to this series as audiobooks from Audible. It's representing Sci-Fi September. This is another book that is both science fiction and murder mystery. It's got a lot of crime in there. I mentioned previously after I read the first 2 books that I was hoping that the strange mystery of how reality is different might be resolved in the 3rd book in the series, and spoilers, it wasn't. It is up against a Sci-Fi September pick that is a fantasy book as well as sci-fi elements. It is called A Glitch in the System, and it is by Kupel, K.Y. Kark. Kupel is another booktuber. I very much enjoy reading books by other booktubers. He emailed me and offered me the book for free as an ebook so that I would have a chance to read his work, and I did really enjoy his book. I had an advanced reading copy. It is somewhat romantic at the beginning as you have this guy involved in the computer world, computer industry, technology. He just wants to date the local barista, the local girl at the coffee shop, but they all get brought into this kind of corporate conspiracy with video gaming, with advanced virtual reality technology. It's a really exciting concept. I recommend the book if you like RPG lit, the way that it combines the idea of gaming with the literature story. But in this pairing, I'm going to give the win to John Scalzi because Book 3, Travel by Bullet, in this series for The Dispatcher turned out much better than I thought. Even though it didn't give me the answers that I wanted, it told a really compelling mystery story, which helped tie up some stuff from the previous books. That brings us to our next pairing. I have been recommended to read for science fiction for Sci-Fi September, the Foundation Trilogy. Several booktubers have talked about it, that I've watched their videos, but the person who stands out the most to me as a huge fan of Isaac Asimov and his writing is John from Hey Y'all Listen Up. He's got a great booktube channel. He and I like a lot of the same kind of sci-fi and fantasy books. It took me a long time to get around to reading the Foundation Trilogy, but I finally did. The first book is Foundation, and then the second one is Foundation and Empire. The third one is called Second Foundation. So I'm not a huge fan of of the titles of the individual books. But Isaac Asimov was writing at a time when a lot of sci-fi and fantasy work was published as short stories, and then the authors would combine the short stories together and call them novels. And so one issue with the Foundation Trilogy is that you have a bunch of shorter works that are combined together, and thus it suffers from they skip time a lot. If you jump from one segment that was a short story previously to another one, and you've jumped time, which means you end up with a different set of characters and that sort of thing. But it was still a delight to read. I really enjoyed reading the Foundation. It is part of sci-fi history, really, to have a better grasp of what inspired a lot of things. And something that I caught was they used the idea of Star's End and something being a mystery that is supposedly at Star's End. When I was growing up, I read the Han Solo trilogy, and one of the books was Han Solo at Star's End. This is paired up against Dane Cobain's short story collection Scarlet Sins, which I read, representing Shorty September. Scarlet Sins is interesting because it's basically a Dane Cobain greatest hits for short stories and songs that he wrote, and he even included some nonfiction at the end with an essay and some explanations about his poems and what his poems mean. So I really enjoyed reading the work. A couple of the stories I'd already read because they were in the HorrorTube anthologies. Pitting Dane Cobain's Scarlet Sins collection up against the Foundation. As much as I love Dane Cobain's writing and think he's great as an AuthorTuber, BookTuber, I'm gonna have to give the win to Isaac Asimov's work as the Foundation Trilogy. It just really stands out. Then I read the Benty Trilogy, which is a series of novellas by Nnedi Okorafor. These have been highly recommended by Michael Everts over at his channel, Fit to Be Read. And this week he's got his huge 210 best sci-fi stories video that's coming out. So I do recommend you hop over to his channel at some point, after you finish this video. The Benty Trilogy was a fun read. It is paired up here against Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, which I knew the story of. I knew about the story. I don't know if I watched the film when I was younger or if people had just told me so much about the book that I already had the story concept planted in my mind. But my goodness, Flowers for Algernon was a spectacular read. It is the story of a man whose mental IQ is lower than the average person, and he just lives a simple life. And then through work done via science, he goes through experimental treatments that make his IQ higher, that make him a smarter person gradually over time. And it's fascinating to see the character development, how that changes his life, and what happens as a result of that. So as amazing as the Benty trilogy of novellas really were, and it was great to explore that character and her journey, I'm giving this win to Flowers for Algernon. And that will complete our prelim set of matches, so we're now going to need to go back up to the top. It's quarterfinals time. We've got The Peril and Decline by Pae Veo up against Station Eternity by Mur Lafferty. So we've got a very philosophical novel up against sci-fi murder mystery. Something I haven't mentioned yet about Station Eternity is I really like the author's world building. I thought that the author did a great job of including aliens that are not necessarily typical of what you usually see in science fiction. Some of the aliens are able to evolve into spaceships or a space station. And it seems as if humans are unique in that most creatures out in the universe in this story have some sort of symbiote relationship with other organisms, other alien life forms, and so they kind of look down on humans. But I also really enjoyed the murder mystery aspects of it. Having said all of that, it's going to lose when competing against The Peril and Decline by Pae Veo. Pae Veo's book advances on up to the next level of competition. Then we've got Fairy Tale by Stephen King up against Alive at the End of the World, poetry collection by Cy Jones. Cy Jones is amazing, and I love his poetry, but I've got to give this one to Stephen King because it was such a pleasant read. I'm sure you've heard this line before, but Stephen King, during the pandemic, decided to write something that should be a fun, relaxing, pleasing read, something he would enjoy writing, that he felt that people would enjoy reading, and that is exactly what Fairy Tale turned out to be. I believe Stephen Stephen King achieved his purpose. He deserves to advance to the next round. Then we've got R. St. Clair's book, Code Red, the vampires going crazy in the asylum in the small town, up against John Scalzi's book, The Dispatcher 3, Travel by Bullet. The book is called Travel by Bullet because in that universe, people, when they die, wake back up at their homes, and their body is in a condition it was hours before that they died. So the idea of travel by bullet is that someone can shoot you and kill you, and you will arrive back at your home. I believe that you're just naked at home in shock from having just been killed and having to deal with that. It's an interesting concept, but I enjoyed R. St. Clair's book much more. The small town people who don't realize what's going on at first and how they deal with it as the inevitable folds, of course. Then we get to the pairing of the Foundation Trilogy up against Flowers for Algernon. This month was really sci-fi heavy, there being Sci-Fi September. It's Isaac Asimov up against Daniel Keyes, which at first glance is a difficult decision, but ultimately the story for Flowers of Algernon really wowed me enough that it's advancing to the next level. No problem whatsoever. And that means we can take a moment to look at our semifinals round, the final four in our book battle this month. It's Pae Veo's Peril and Decline, Stephen King's Fairy Tale, R. St. Clair's Code Red, and Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon. That's philosophical literature, fantasy, horror, and science fiction. What a nice grouping we have for our final four. And I just want to go ahead and say, I highly recommend all four of these books. If you like those genres, I think you should check them out and read them. So now we have some difficult decisions. For semifinals, The Peril and Decline up against Fairy Tale. I love Pae Veo's creativity, but I've got to give this win to Stephen King. Ultimately, Pae Veo's book is philosophical and it's a joy to read, but the existential crisis only gets you so far. Stephen King's book is much more plot-driven and has some characters that are really endearing. Fairy Tale is advancing to finals. Then we've got R. St. Clair's Code Red up against Flowers for Algernon. And again, I'm going to say, I really like Regina St. Clair. I think she's amazing. She's doing great work. But in this case, Flowers for Algernon is just, it's classic science fiction at this point. It is, to me, great work of literature combining some of those philosophical ideas in with the story. So our finals round, we end up with Fairy Tale by Stephen King up against Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. And you might think that I could just pull a tie here because I've still got room with my wild cards for the end of the year book battle. But I don't want to tie this month. I want to force myself to pick between them. So ultimately, I enjoyed reading both of these books a whole lot, but the one that blew me away was Flowers for Algernon. If you've not read this story, it's short. It is a short book. It is an easy read. It may make you feel like someone is walking around chopping onions around you. It may make you tear up and cry at certain parts of it. It is a very touching story. Flowers for Algernon is my best read of the month. I hope that you've enjoyed this book battle. Gonna go ahead and place Flowers for Algernon into the end of the year book battle. You can see how everything is mounting to a close eventually. We just finished September, which means we've got October, November, and December remaining, and then we're gonna have that big book battle at the end of the year. I hope you're excited. Please leave me comments down below. Click the like button, the thumbs up, do all those awesome things. Let me know if you disagreed with my decisions, if you have book recommendations, if you don't have your own channel where you post about what you've been reading for the month. I'd love for you to put comments down below and let me know what it is that you've been enjoying reading. And as I always like to say at the end of the video, every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.